The stage lights dimmed slowly, casting a soft golden glow as the two Filipino siblings stepped forward, one holding a slightly worn microphone, the other hugging a guitar that looked like it had survived years of practice sessions, family gatherings, and late-night dreams. Their steps were small, careful, almost hesitant. The boy's shoes squeaked on the shiny AGT floor, and the girl's fingers trembled on the guitar strings, not from cold but from the weight of the moment. The vast auditorium felt like another universe. Thousands of faces stretched out before them, but everything blurred into a single overwhelming wave. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing with genuine interest. Heidi smiled encouragingly. Sofa whispered something to Howie, who nodded. The energy in the room was thick, part anticipation, part curiosity. The siblings looked at each other, the kind of look only people who share the same childhood memories could understand. It held years of laughter, struggles, hope, and the silent promise they always made: we do this together. The boy swallowed hard, and the girl gently nudged him with her shoulder, offering strength the way an older sister always does. Hello. The girl's voice cracked as she introduced them. We're siblings from the Philippines. The audience reacted with soft applause. The boy added something shyly, but his words trembled under the weight of the moment. Even the microphones seemed too loud, amplifying every breath, every pause, every swallow. They shared a bit of their story, how they would sing during brownouts back home, how their parents recorded every performance on an old phone, how they dreamed of standing on a grand stage like this one. But now that they were actually here, under the blinding AGT lights, the reality hit them harder than they expected. The stage felt too big, the silence felt too heavy. A hush swept through the room as they took their positions, preparing to sing. Even the distant murmurs from the audience faded away. It was as if the entire world held its breath. The boy took one shaky inhale, gripping the mic with both hands, while the girl adjusted the guitar strap on her shoulder, her fingers hovering over the strings but not yet daring to play. From the judges' table, Simon glanced at the siblings with a look that wasn't harsh, just focused, almost protective. He knew the nerves. He recognized the fear. And maybe, just maybe, he sensed something more beneath their timid exterior. The siblings were still frozen in place, not because they weren't ready, but because they knew how much this performance meant. Years of practice, late-night sessions, and singing to cracked walls and dusty fans had led them here. Back home their family was probably watching from a living room, huddled around a TV, praying and hoping and whispering encouragement. The girl tightened her grip on the guitar. She tilted her chin up, inhaling deeply like she was grounding herself in memories of warm Filipino sunsets, laughter-filled karaoke nights, and the familiar comfort of her brother's voice blending with hers. The boy looked down at the floor for a moment, centering himself. His heart felt like a drum pounding inside his chest, loud enough that he wondered if the microphone could pick it up. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to silence the panic rising inside him. This wasn't just a performance. It was a chance, a dream, a miracle wrapped in music. The spotlight softened around them, turning the massive stage into something intimate, almost like their childhood living room. For a brief second, they forgot the thousands of people watching. They forgot about the cameras, the judges, the lights. All they could feel was each other's presence, the same comfort they'd carried since they were kids, sharing songs during storms and singing to distract themselves from the world outside. She nodded at him, slow, reassuring, confident. He nodded back a silent "I'm ready." And for the first time since stepping onto the stage they breathed together, a synchronized inhale that steadied their nerves and reminded them why they were here, not for fame, not for applause, but to share the one thing that connected them deeper than blood, their music. The crowd fell completely still. Not a whisper, not a cough, not a rustle of movement. The silence wrapped around them like a thin, fragile veil, ready to tear at the slightest mistake, but also ready to lift them higher if they dared to begin. The girl lifted her hand toward the strings. The boy leaned toward the mic. Their shadows stretched on the floor behind them, merging into one. And just as the first note was about to break the silence, something magical happened. Every fear melted, every doubt vanished, and the world felt suddenly small, quiet, and full of possibility. They were no longer nervous performers. They were two siblings standing at the edge of a dream, ready to sing their way into history. The girl's fingers tightened around the neck of her guitar, her breathing soft and steady despite the enormity of the stage before them. The boy stood just a step behind her, small enough that the microphone seemed almost too tall for him, but determined enough that he lifted his chin anyway. A quiet signal passed between them, one soft glance, one almost invisible nod, and then she gently strummed the first chord. It was a simple sound, barely more than a whisper beneath the towering speakers of the AGT arena. The crowd leaned forward instinctively, sensing that what was coming might not be loud but might be something far more important, something honest. And then the boy opened his mouth. The first note floated into the air like a fragile bird taking its first leap. It was soft, trembling slightly from nerves, yet carrying a kind of purity that stunned the audience into immediate silence. It wasn't showy, it wasn't powerful, but it was real, so real that Simon Cowell, who had heard thousands of singers in his life, actually leaned closer to hear it better. The boy's eyes were shut tight, as if the only way he could face this moment was to disappear inside the music. His voice quivered at first, shaped by uncertainty and fear, but every second strengthened it. And then, like the warming glow of sunrise, his tone stabilized into a gentle, angelic clarity that wrapped itself around the room. The audience felt it, not just heard it. People who had been scrolling on their phones or whispering to friends suddenly lifted their heads. Something special was happening. The sister listened, her smile trembling with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. She'd heard that voice a million times, during long nights in their small living room, during power outages when they sang to pass time, during the little gigs they performed at community events. But hearing it here, on this massive world stage, with lights orbiting around them and cameras trained on every expression, made her chest tighten. This was her baby brother, singing like their mother always said he would, with a heart bigger than his body. And then she joined him. Her voice slipped in like a warm breeze beside his, not overpowering, not competing, just completing. Their harmony was the kind that couldn't be trained or manufactured. It was built from years of singing side by side, copying each other, teasing each other, and laughing until their throats hurt. When their voices met, it was like two puzzle pieces clicking perfectly into place. People in the audience exchanged looks, some smiling, some already welling up with tears. A mother held her hands over her heart. A teenager whispered something to her friend, completely taken by surprise. Even Howie, who was usually playful and upbeat, softened in expression, his eyes narrowing with appreciation. The siblings didn't move much, they didn't need to. Their performance wasn't about flashy choreography or giant notes meant to impress. It was about authenticity. Two young Filipino kids pouring their entire story into a song, every line echoing moments they lived, pains they endured, dreams they carried. As the harmony built, their confidence began to grow. The boy opened his eyes now, glancing toward his sister as if drawing strength from her presence. She nodded almost imperceptibly, her fingers strumming with growing steadiness. Their voices rose together, swelling into a sound richer than anyone anticipated from two small figures standing on an enormous stage. Simon raised an eyebrow, the expression he makes when he realizes he misjudged someone. Heidi touched her chest, feeling the emotion rising with the melody. Mel B's lips parted in awe. The siblings had done what many performers fail to do. They captured the room not through volume, but through vulnerability. The soft harmonies filled the space, turning the arena into something intimate, like a quiet living room where two kids simply loved to sing. The siblings were no longer nervous. The fear that had tightened their shoulders and dried their throats melted away, replaced by pure connection. Connection to each other, to the song, and to the thousands of eyes watching them. And beneath everything, the applause yet to come, the reactions yet to be seen, there was a feeling spreading across the room, quietly, gently, like a tide pulling everyone into the same emotional wave. The audience didn't just hear the music, they believed in it. They felt it in their chests. They didn't quite understand how, but they knew one thing for certain. This performance was becoming something extraordinary. The siblings continue singing, and with each passing second, something inside them begins to awaken. Something deeper than nerves, deeper than fear, something born from years of dreaming in small rooms, singing under dim lights, and performing in front of family members who always believed in them more than they believed in themselves. The boy's voice steadies, gaining warmth and confidence as the melody rises. The sister's harmonies grow richer, her tone wrapping around his like a protective embrace. It's obvious they've practiced this song hundreds of times, but tonight, something is different. Tonight every word feels heavier. Every note feels like a confession. The audience senses it immediately, falling even more silent as the siblings pour their hearts into each verse. Simon narrows his eyes, trying to understand what he's witnessing. It's not just vocal skill. It's not just talent. It feels like a moment. One of those rare, unrepeatable moments where two people channel everything they've lived through into a single performance. As the siblings sing, memories seem to wash over them. You can almost see it in their trembling voices and the way their eyes glisten under the stage lights. They remember singing during brownouts back home, with only candles and the sound of distant traffic as their audience. They remember performing at school programs where the microphone barely worked. Yet they still gave everything they had. They remember how their parents would clap louder than anyone else, telling them they were meant for something big. Even when life didn't always feel that way. Those memories live inside their voices tonight. Every breath holds a story. Every harmony carries their journey. The sister shifts her guitar, leaning in slightly as she layers her voice over his. It's a harmony so natural it almost doesn't sound practiced at all. It feels instinctive, like it lives in their DNA. Her voice adds a soft edge to his pure tone, creating a blend that causes a ripple through the audience. People begin placing hands over their hearts. Some blink through tears they didn't expect to shed. And the boy he starts to sing with a bravery that surprises even him. His voice, once shaky at the start, now fills the room with emotion that doesn't need translation. You can hear the innocence in it, the sincerity, the way he holds nothing back because this moment means too much to hide behind fear. As the song climbs toward its next part, the siblings take a small step closer to each other. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it speaks volumes. They're drawing strength from one another. They've always done it. At home, at school, during family gatherings. But here under the bright AGT lights, that bond is magnified 1,000 times. Heidi leans forward, her lips parted as if she's afraid to breathe and disrupt what she's hearing. Sophia whispers something under her breath, her eyes fixed on the stage. Even Howie, usually quick with jokes, stays completely still. They're all caught up in the emotional current the siblings have created. One that feels gentle and nostalgic, yet powerful enough to pull everyone in. The siblings' voices rise together again, and the sisters' fingers glide along the guitar strings with newfound certainty. The sound grounds the performance, keeping it warm, organic, and intimate despite the massive size of the auditorium. It feels less like a competition show and more like watching two souls communicate through music, telling a story that words alone could never express. The boy takes a breath, deeper, fuller than before. The audience doesn't know it, but this is the moment he always struggles with during practice. The note he's about to hit is tough, the kind that requires not just technique but courage. His sister knows it too. Without breaking her harmony, she gives him a tiny nod, a silent message: you can do this, I'm right here. He lifts his chin slightly. The lights shimmer around them, the music swells, and for the first time tonight his voice soars. It isn't the biggest note, not the highest, not the loudest, but it carries everything. It trembles with vulnerability, strength, and a tenderness that reaches every corner of the theater. A few people in the crowd gasp softly. Someone wipes a tear. A couple holds hands tighter. The sister meets his voice perfectly, lifting him, supporting him, completing him. Their harmonies expand, filling the room with a richness that feels almost unreal. It's as if every experience they've ever shared, every joy, every hardship, every dream whispered late at night, is rising with them in this single, breathtaking moment. By the time they transition into the next section of the song, the tension in the room has transformed. The stakes feel bigger, the emotions feel heavier, and everyone watching knows something extraordinary is building. The entire room seemed to shrink as the song approached its emotional peak. The guitar softened, turning almost into a whisper, as if it knew it needed to step aside for what was about to come. The older sister shifted her grip on the guitar, her fingers trembling ever so slightly, but still steady enough to carry the final chord. The younger brother inhaled deeply, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire world inhaled with him. The judges leaned forward, the audience held their breath. Even the camera operators froze, zooming in on the siblings as if they knew this was the exact moment that could change their lives. The siblings exchanged a look, one that carried years of shared memories. Nights singing during brownouts, turning candlelight into stage lights. Days performing on street corners hoping someone would listen. Moments when they questioned whether chasing music was worth the struggle, whether anyone would ever notice two kids from a small Filipino town with big dreams. All of that lived in that single glance between them. It wasn't just communication, it was agreement, it was courage, it was a silent promise: let's do this, no matter what happens next. Then came the note. The boy opened his mouth and his voice didn't just rise, it soared. It climbed higher than anyone expected, a crystal clear high note that was impossibly pure. It was strong without being strained, emotional without breaking. It was the kind of note that felt like it came from somewhere deeper than lungs or vocal cords, somewhere closer to the heart. The sister followed instantly, her harmony blending with his in a way that made the sound fuller, bigger, almost divine. Her voice wrapped around his like a warm shield, steadying the moment while simultaneously lifting it even higher. The crowd reacted instantly. Though not with noise at first. No, the very first reaction was silence. A shocked, stunned silence that rushed through the auditorium like a wave. People looked at one another with wide eyes. A man in the second row grabbed the arm of the woman beside him. A teen near the front covered her mouth with both hands, and one of the judges whispered, "No way." Under their breath, their eyes fixed on the stage. Then the shock broke. Somewhere in the back of the theater, a voice cried out, "Oh ah!" It echoed through the room and triggered an eruption. The entire audience exploded into cheers, screams, claps, everything all at once. People jumped out of their seats, some waved their arms, others simply cried, overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of what they had just heard. You could feel the emotion physically, like a wave crashing forward. Simon Cowell sat frozen for a moment, his mouth slightly open, his usually stern expression replaced by something rare, true astonishment. He blinked, almost in disbelief, as if he needed a moment to process what he had just heard. Heidi brought her hands to her face, fighting a tear. Howie leaned back, shaking his head in awe. Even Sophia, who had heard countless voices in her life, couldn't stop repeating the same word, "Wow wow wow." And still the note continued. The siblings held it with astonishing control, their voices unwavering. It wasn't just technical perfection, it was emotional storytelling. You could hear the hope, the struggle, the dreams, the sacrifices. It was as if the siblings were pouring every part of themselves into that one moment, knowing it might be the single most important second of their lives. Finally, the note faded, drifting gently into the air like the end of a prayer. The boy lowered his microphone, breathing hard but smiling through tears. The sister wiped her cheek, her hand shaking as she steadied her guitar. For a second, the room seemed to hang in time, waiting to exhale. Then came the explosion of applause, louder, bigger, more emotional than before. It wasn't just appreciation, it was gratitude. The audience wasn't cheering for the siblings, they were cheering because of them. Because they had just witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And in that moment, under those blinding lights, with tears in their eyes and the sound of thousands clapping for them, the siblings knew they didn't just hit a note, they hit a dream. The moment the last harmony faded into the air, the siblings were left standing in a silence so thick it almost felt unreal. They looked at each other, breathing hard, adrenaline rushing through their veins. For a split second, they didn't know if the audience loved it or if they had gone too far. The boy clutched the microphone with trembling fingers, his chest rising and falling quickly, while his sister held onto her guitar like it was the only thing grounding her to the stage. Then it happened, slow at first, like a wave rising from the back of the theater. Hands clapped. Someone shouted. Another person yelled "was." Then the entire room surged into a thunderous explosion of sound. The audience rose to their feet in one powerful sweep, cheering so loudly it nearly drowned out the siblings' stunned breaths. Lights flashed, cameras zoomed in, confetti cannons stood ready as if the very stage was waiting to celebrate with them. The siblings froze, eyes wide in disbelief. The girl's lip quivered as she lifted a shaky hand to her mouth. The boy blinked several times, his vision blurring with tears he'd been too nervous to shed earlier. He wasn't just emotional, he was overwhelmed, vulnerable, and deeply proud all at once. It felt like everything they had carried through their childhood, the dreams, the struggles, the tiny performances for neighbors, the late-night practice sessions under dim lights during brownouts, suddenly formed a single, shining moment right here on this massive stage. He turned his head slightly, watching the audience with eyes full of wonder. People were crying, wiping tears from their cheeks, hugging the person next to them. They weren't just clapping, they were celebrating. Celebrating them. Celebrating the courage it took for two Filipino siblings to stand in front of the world and pour their hearts into one shared note. The sister finally broke. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. The boy reached for her hand instinctively, something he'd done ever since he was small and scared during school recitals. She squeezed back, her body trembling with a mixture of joy and relief. And then the judges stood up, one by one. Howie, grinning ear to ear, Heidi, glowing with pride, Mel B, visibly emotional as she clapped with both hands, and Simon rose slowly, the shock and admiration on his face unmistakable. He wasn't just clapping, he was acknowledging something rare, something unforgettable. His expression said it all. This performance mattered. The siblings turned toward him, not quite believing what they were seeing. Simon Cowell, someone known for being brutally honest and nearly impossible to impress, stood there applauding them like they had just reinvented music itself. The girl gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest, while the boy's lips parted as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. When the applause finally softened, Simon leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "That," he said slowly, letting the suspense build, "was extraordinary." The siblings broke into tears again, not because of the words alone but because of the weight behind them. Extraordinary. A word they had never expected to hear. a word they had never dared to dream would be used for them. The girl nodded gratefully while wiping her cheeks, and the boy smiled through the tears, the kind of smile that comes from someone who just realized a lifelong dream was no longer a dream, it was real. They stood there soaking in the moment as the crowd continued cheering, chanting, celebrating them. For these siblings, this wasn't just a performance. It wasn't just a big stage or a chance at a golden buzzer. It was the culmination of years of shared dreams, of singing through struggles, of believing in something even when life made it hard to believe. And as the lights glowed warmly behind them, casting their silhouettes across the AGT stage, they knew one thing for certain: they had created a moment the world wouldn't forget.